Okay. I'm going to call to order the Board of Trustees meeting of the Village of Riverwoods. Will you please stand with me and say the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First order of business is the roll call, please.
Mayor Ford.
Present.
Trustee Clayton.
Here.
Trustee Dickon is absent. Trustee Eastman.
Here.
Trustee Hollander.
Here.
Trustee Jamerson is absent, and Trustee Smith is absent. We still have a quorum, though.
Okay, thank you. First order of business is the approval of minutes of the Board of Trustees meeting for November 7th, 2023. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Comments, questions, part of the board? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Next order of business, Treasurer and Finance Report. The first item is the approval of bills. Do I have a motion, please?
I move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Or any questions? I don't even have to turn my head this time. This is really outstanding. Yeah. Trustee Eastman,
I
please.
just had one question about the bill for Kemper Lesnick. I assume that that was sort of the balance of the support that they were providing us in relation to the Baxter matter.
Yes, sir.
Will we be retaining them for any other purposes beyond that, or?
I think we're in discussion right now.
Okay.
So we will certainly come to you if there's any change or anything else that's to be added to that.
Okay. Thanks. That's it.
Okay, any other questions? Would you like to have any, do you have any questions or comments for the bills? Would you like to sit down first?
Sorry for my delay. Got delayed coming back from Peoria.
There,
Phil Bradley. So Thanksgiving break.
Oh,
Just since you walked in, Trustee Smith, there is a motion on the floor and a second to approve the bills, and the vote was just about to be taken.
any questions?
I do not have any questions.
Oh, terrific. Okay, roll call, please.
Trustee Clayton.
aye.
Trustee Eastman. Trustee Hollander.
Aye.
Trustee Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item is a report from our interim finance director, Mr. Bill Balling.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it. My role here is ending in terms of the recruitments. Oh, sorry. Better, huh? Okay, thank you. Mayor Ford asked me to give an update and summation on the progress that we made. And obviously, I'm very, very pleased with the results and direction that we took on the assignments that we had here. Let me start with the executive recruitment. Obviously, we retained two highly qualified directors, Tony Vasquez and Stephen Witt, and they've really gotten into the groove of working with our organization. I will say comfortably, because at least they're sitting in the padded chairs tonight, but they do a tremendous job for us. And the important things from the village standpoint is not only are they really good, but they met or exceeded the experience and academic requirements that we had for the positions, a lot of metropolitan Chicago experience, and really have done a wonderful job fitting into our overall program. So we're really, really pleased with the hires, and everybody has picked up and is kind of they're slightly been here for 10 years. So thanks to both of you. We did have onboarding was a little bit of a challenge because we don't have a lot of hiring in the mix, and we had even though we have very good insurance we buy through the Illinois Department of Central Management Services, and it was the transfer of that was a little bit clumsy for us to have, and we had some challenges in enrollment with regard to the deferred compensation program, which is voluntary for the members, but we think we've worked out some of those bugs. But in the course of looking at that, one of the one of the issues that we faced is we're really thin on the HR administration of things that go on in the village. And we brought that up to the Compensation and Benefits Committee, and they've asked me to put together an outline for perhaps outsourcing of that in the future, if we can do so cost effectively and it's responsive to the needs of the village. So we'll be looking to do that in December to the committee, and then bring back a report to the board to see if you want to move in that direction. Regarding Steve and Tony, Steve has taken on a pretty broad role in terms of overall supervision, if you will, and coordination of our really fine consultant team that we have in place. And for environmental and civil engineering matters, we're going to hear a big report tonight on our drainage update. And he's adapted very well to that. He's also, as our zoning administrator, has really picked up and focused on a lot of non-conforming uses within our residential properties to make sure that they're properly managed. And if they're not, that any issues are abated. And he's taken that on a one-on-one on a one-on-one basis. Tony on the finance side has done a really good job of absorbing into the issues of capital finance, the utility management, understanding our utility system, which is complex, and has really picked up the ball on working with the finance committee that we have, and done a good job with that. I am also, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. When we did the second part of my engagement, we did those two recruitments, but myself and Hannah Sullivan served as the interim finance director on a kind of a team basis. And we worked through the context of a finance team. And we met Wednesdays, and the team was Moses Diaz, our accountant, Hannah, myself, and Michael Clayton. Thank you very much, Michael, for giving up your Wednesdays for a few months there. But it was a great coordination vehicle because it kept us up to date on not only policy directions, but things to be done. And it was a great check off every week. And obviously, Tony has joined that process now that he's here on a permanent basis. But that worked very well. And I think we're satisfied with the progress. But as I said, in the other part that I thought was important to report back to the board was the success we had with using the Compensation and Benefits Committee as our recruitment screening committee. Did a great job, put in a lot of extra hours to interview the candidates, to call them, to come up with our recommendations, because we had a very good competitive recruitment process, and they did a very, very good job for us and represented the village board very well in that process. So I would recommend doing that again. As I said, as far as an improvement thing, if we can improve maybe some of the HR administration that goes on, that would be a great thing as well. Finally, I just wanted to thank the board. The whole WRB team really enjoyed the opportunity to serve Riverwoods. It's a great board. It's a great staff now. We're going to be very responsive to your needs, and very, very pleasant to work with. So I don't always get that in some of these assignments, but I got one here. So I wanted to thank you. And I would open up for any questions that you might have in terms of the engagements, any things we had.
Trustee Hollander, please.
You alluded early on to non-forming or residences that we have that are not compatible?
Well, no, our zoning ordinance is very precise in a residential districts that there's only so many things you can accomplish and do, and you're allowed to do some professional work within the confines of your, if you have an accounting practice, for example, or something of that sort. But we found through basically observation of what's going on, reports from others, that we've got signs going up for different types of treatment and different types of events that have, multiple car parking obligations in residential districts, active commercialization signs up on Deerfield Road, signs on announcing events, published events, things that are going well beyond what is, I think, protective to the, to the zoning district and respective of the zoning districts that are in place. So that hasn't had a lot of attention in the past, either that or it's accelerating more. You know, we've talked about, on the board level, we talked about a little bit with people that renting out their swimming pools and things of that sort. We've taken some action on that. But now we're getting into more extensive, almost commercial use of properties, and that's not good for property values, it's not good for the neighbors, and it's not conforming. So what we've done is, and what Steve has done, is really taken on a property by property initiative and assessment and evaluation of what the conditions are, and if it's bad, work out a mitigation plan to get rid of those types of uses. But we've taken some calls, we've made some more observations, and I think in the long-range picture, restoring a level of discipline to the zoning districts that are in place and understanding the rights and privileges that people have, and also the impact if they're overrun by other types of uses is what we're looking for right now.
So most of these you're saying are due to the home businesses or home events?
Yeah, events. We've seen some really unusual events that don't belong in our residential districts.
Is there any further discussion or questions for our interim finance director? And I think that means the title interim finance director is going to morph into simply consultant, helping us with finding yet another member of our team. But thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a pleasure working for the village. It really has. And you've got a
very productive,
I'm not
very productive.
patronizing to you, but you got a great board. You've got understanding and policy and direction for this village. And you don't always find that in some of the assignments I'm involved in. So
Thank you very
Thank
much. Thank you. Moving along then, our not so new, but Director of Community Services, please.
I have nothing special to report tonight, Mayor.
Are there any questions for our director? Okay, moving along, consultants report, attorneys report, please.
I have nothing to report.
And moving right along, the village engineer, and we certainly do have something tonight.
Good evening. Real quick, on my report, Saunders Road Forest Main is starting up again. So they're coordinating and they're actually formalizing, and we're just working on some utility stuff. So that should be going full force ahead if you get any phone calls. That is currently going on. With that, tonight we have our team from our Water Resources Group to present about the stormwater study. So I'm going to hand it over to May Zhu to introduce everyone. May is our Director of Water Resources, and I will hand it over to them to give you a fun presentation about stormwater.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here to present the village-wide stormwater study.
Excuse me, can you please spell your name?
Oh, MEI, first name, last name, ZHU.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm gonna introduce my team here. We have Mike Warner, who is a principal at the Water Resources Division, and two of our engineers, Dan Vanek and Cesar Acquer. Do you need the name spelled out? Mike Warner, Dan Vanek, V-A-N-E-K, and Cesar, C-E-S-A-R, A-G-U-I-R-R-E, correct? Okay. All right. So can we flip to the next page? Thank you. So this is a brief outline of our presentation tonight. First, we're going to introduce the purpose and the objectives of our study. And then we're going to talk about how we collected data, how we analyzed them, and how we came to focused study areas. I think we have about 10 studied areas we're going to present today. And then we're going to talk about how we prioritize those studied areas. And then we're going to go over each of those areas. We're going to have some conceptual design exhibits along with the cost estimates for each of those project areas. Finally, we're going to talk about some potential funding sources. So during our presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. We don't have to wait till the, when it ends, okay? So actually, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who did the heavy lifting of this project.
Hi, I'm Dan Vanek, Water Resources Engineer with Diebold Hamilton. Can we go to the next slide? So our methodology for determining stormwater issues throughout the village was we sent out a resident survey, which was available to all residents, and we received hundreds of responses. Using those responses, as well as talking to village staff, historical documents, and field visits, we determined where key stormwater issues were throughout the village. And we determined that there were 10 areas for study, which are listed here. And the resident questionnaire is shown on the right side there. Next slide. And our goals are to determine the problems, stormwater problems throughout the village, then develop solutions for those problems, and give the village opportunities for funding, so which is grants. And we were hired to do this study because there are a variety of stormwater issues throughout the village. Riverwoods is very flat, which leads to difficult to solve flooding problems. There's the Des Plaines River and the North Branch Chicago River creating floodplain issues on both sides. And throughout the village, there are creeks that run with their own floodplains. In addition, climate change led to increased rainfall, which has made it so that some of the infrastructure that there is a little outdated. Next slide. Here we can see a couple maps. Where on the left side, we can see that there's two main drainage areas of the village. One that goes to the Des Plaines River, one that goes to the Chicago River. And on the right there, we can see that the Des Plaines River has a floodplain that covers a portion of the village, making certain residential areas have flooding issues. Next slide. One of the reasons that Riverwoods has some flooding issues is there aren't many detention basins throughout the village. The village was developed prior to the Lake County Stormwater Ordinance requiring these detention basins. So you can see here that there's only just a few kind of on the fringes, and there's large parts of the village without any detention basins at all. Next slide. These normally show up in the middle, but here is a map of the resident questionnaires. We received more than is seen here, but these are the questionnaires that identify some sort of stormwater issue. It could be they want swale maintenance or driveway culvert maintenance, or they're experiencing some sort of greater flooding problem, like the roadway is flooding or their property. Next slide.
Excuse me, before you go to the next slide, the slide that symbolized the questionnaire.
Yes.
All that. In the corner that's concern level, questionnaire concern level. Can you describe that just a bit for me, please?
Yes. So just going from the least concern to the most, some residents had no concern at all. They don't flood, nothing around them floods, so everything's fine. Some have just maintenance issues where they want their swale to be, roadside swale to be cleaned, their driveway culvert to be cleaned. Beyond that, they might have a problem where just their own property floods. And maybe the village doesn't want to go in and do a big project to solve just one property, maybe try to solve multiple ones. So that would be the next level where we have a flooding problem that's maybe flooding a roadway, and there's 5 or more properties that are all flooding. And our last category is where it's kind of beyond the scope of our study. So on the western part of the village, there's the Des Plaines River and the Des Plaines River floodway and floodplain. To solve these problems, it could be some sort of solution by the Army Corps, which is, or it would need an individual solution for each property. So it's just kind of beyond the scope of what we could accomplish in the study.
So is a good interpretation of the last bullet says no solution, and that's a little dramatic, maybe, I don't know. But
Yes.
does it really mean that it's beyond the scope?
Yeah,
That there's no solution in this particular study?
exactly.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Is it possible to separate those stormwater issues which are primarily naturally occurring and those which are primarily development related to impervious surfaces and so on and so forth?
Good question. I suppose that is possible, though we did not do that in the study. Okay, next slide. Oh, now it's showing up correctly.
Yeah.
Technology. So here we have previously listed, there were 10 study areas determined through the resident questionnaires and other methods. And here we have mapped over the village the 10 study areas. Going through it, we have Julie Lane and West Course Drive, Linden and Lane, Wickham Road, Portland Road, Concord Court, Gemini Lane, Meredith Drive, Chianti Creek, Thorngate Creek, and some drainage ditches. Each of these areas was studied separately, modeled in the stormwater modeling software, and we created a concept exhibit to resolve the flooding issue with a corresponding cost estimate. Next slide. What's shown here is the same map as the previous slide, but in red we have the drainage area to each study area. This tributary drainage area shows that it's not only the homes that are flooding, causing the flooding, it's the properties from larger areas of the village that all come to flood single areas. So it's not only the problem of the homeowners who are experiencing the flooding.
Or to put it another way, it's not only the owners living within the blue areas, they are incurring the consequences of all the drainage coming from the red areas.
Well said.
And other places.
And the yellow lines represent the drainage area to Thorngate Creek and Chianti Creek. Next slide.
I have a question.
Oh, certainly.
That's all right. You talk about flooding. Did you differentiate flooding on the property versus a home having water in it? Because the reason I ask that, granted, the work I did about 4 years ago through FEMA, through the flood program, that there were essentially no homes that had a flood claim. Properties were flooded in the sense there was water on properties, but nothing in the home. Did you do anything to differentiate actual flood damage to the property versus the homes?
What we found is there's a lot of properties that flood, but we didn't find flooding homes.
Did you find any home in Riverwoods that had flooded?
Not from the resident responses.
The reason I ask that, and I just wanted to keep it in mind as we move forward on this, is that when we talk about flooding, we're talking about land, not about any damage to homes. And I think we need to keep those two things separate because they have different consequences.
There are quite a number of homes that are in the floodway and floodplain. So there's an indication based on mapping and elevation that there's homes that would flood. So we didn't get any, no one came forward and said, yeah, I've gotten water in my house. But based on just the mapping information, there are homes that appear to, like the first floor is below the flood elevation.
I did it from 2010 to 2020. As I said, this was 4 years ago.
Okay.
And there were no reports of homes flooded in Riverwoods during that 10-year period. It may not be 100% accurate, but it certainly, if there were homes flooded, we don't know about them. And I understand they are in the flood area, potentially could flood, but over a decade, I just think we ought to keep that in mind.
Okay.
That sense, there are 10 projects, and you probably will not do them all at once. We prioritize the projects, so you can see which projects we recommend should come first.
Could you talk about, and this is something that came up in our early, when the committee met on this, what leads to a higher priority? So it isn't flooding in houses that we were talking about. It's obstruction to roadways. It's passage of emergency vehicles. So what are some of the factors that elevate something to the highest priority as opposed to lower, so that everyone knows why these are matters of concern, and even matters worth spending money on, for that matter? Not just 2 inches of water, but what is it that makes these worthy of concern?
So, agreed, it is roadway flooding was a key problem that came up throughout these study areas. But also it is number of properties affected. And one way that a number of properties can be affected is, let's say there's a long cul-de-sac and that cul-de-sac floods. None of those homes can be reached by emergency vehicles, which can create a danger during a storm. Also, if a project's a prerequisite for other projects, say Port Wine Road in particular, if you want to fix the stormwater issues adjacent to Port Wine Road, you'll have to construct Port Wine Road first. So that means it's a more important project because other things depend on it. So roadway flooding, number of properties affected, and if other projects depend on it.
Yeah, just building off of that, I was kind of surprised to see that there wasn't explicitly in the prioritization the potential, like Mike Warner said, of properties that were below the floodplain, or the potential for a serious emergency issue by blocking roads or restricting access in some ways, that those things weren't immediately elevated to the top.
All of the flood study areas have the same roadway flooding issue. So Bunker Court, Wigham Road, Meredith, Gemini, Clendon, and West Course all have the same roadway flooding issue. So that kind of cancels it out if they all have the same issue. except for Thorngate Creek and Canty Creek, which ended up at the bottom anyways.
So I guess another way to put it is the answer is yes, it was taken into account. But all of those roads are, get to the point where they're impassable during large floods. So, so then once,
Is that like a 100-year flood or yeah?
even some of them were less than 100-year level, weren't they?
Yes.
How long does it remain impassable? Is this a 24 hours, 36 hours? I mean, just give us some idea of how long they remain impassable.
I think the modeled storm was a 12-hour storm, so 12 hours, but these could be a key period of time. So if you have an intense storm, that might be the particular time when an ambulance needs to get to a house.
I think what I'm hearing is that if you look at the total price tag for this, that's quite a burden. And in order to raise awareness and raise concern and raise, frankly, interest in accomplishing these projects, the items that our trustees are bringing up, property damage, is very, very important. Now, no one can guess the future, but what you're suggesting by talking about the elevations and the change in elevations, now things are below the, floodwater stage and so forth. We're trying to look ahead, and we've got a number of problems to solve. I think we all know there's standing water, but if it doesn't come in and touch me, I'm not going to be that concerned. What we want to be concerned about is that 10, 20 years hence, if we don't do something now, what can we can expect property damage. That's what I'm kind of hearing, but I'm not getting a real strong, basis for that. And I don't know if I misstated what the trustees were trying to get at, but this is an enormous project, and it's of terrific importance to the village as a whole, and certainly to property values, if not property damage. And how that would affect people's insurance, flood insurance, the ability to get flood insurance. Those are all factors, I think, in deciding how, when, and how fast we can get to these things. So if you can add to that, that would be very, very helpful.
Just a minute, please. We mapped the floodplain through Chianti and Thorngate. Could FEMA eventually map that and put it in the floodplain?
Well, I guess a question back to Mayor Ford is,
Yes.
so is there additional analysis that you're asking for to put into the report? So for example, the comment about what homes are flooding. We're a little concerned about, identifying individual properties. So we're kind of more giving it kind of a high level approach, but there are floodplains based on new rainfall that we've modeled in this study. So it does take into account the latest rainfall projections from the Illinois State Water Survey, and they are 25% higher, those rainfall projections than what the old floodplains are based on.
Yeah. And if we don't solve it now, what will, I assume a lot of these are interconnected. And
Correct.
maybe that goes into what comes first, as your colleague was explaining, Port Wine Road needs to come before, maybe some other projects in order to accommodate flow. So I'm hearing that perhaps there's a sequence of events here. There's a sequence of areas that need to be followed in order to get the water moving away and continuing on its way wherever it goes, downstream.
Right.
And so that's what I think we need to bear in mind. What happens if you've got, the projections are in here, and what you're suggesting is do this first so it doesn't get worse downstream.
Correct. And we do have a good base level of topography around basically the whole county and Riverwoods. So we can tell fairly within, inches of, what the elevations are going to be on the new floodplains up adjacent to structures. And that is a little bit of a concern, I guess, with the reporting from the community back, is that I think that a lot of folks may not want to admit that they flooded, possibly, or they haven't seen the rainfall yet that will flood their house. So, and maybe that's coming around the corner. Cook County got two federal declared disasters this year, one in July and one in September. The July storm was 20 miles from here and it rained 9 inches of rainfall. The September storm was 40 miles from here and it also rained about 9 inches. So it can happen, and we are seeing those events, right across the county border. So it is a concern.
And we're impacted most closely or most by those properties that are, or that area north of us or west of us. So we have to be prepared in Lake County and in our area in particular to handle that flow. Am I getting the drift of this correctly?
Yeah, the two separate watersheds, I should say, that Dan had described, the North Branch Chicago River and then the Des Plaines. We've all seen the Des Plaines rise, in 2017 to its highest level ever recorded. And the North Branch as well had some flooding problems, impassable roads within the village, lots of problems like that. So it creates two problem areas, but it also opens up the possibility of other funding sources, because you do have two separate watersheds and there's different agencies that cover the needs of both of those watersheds.
This is really a preparedness study then? Being
Correct.
prepared for the future, being prepared for flows from other places that maybe aren't taking that into account?
And it can be used, I think Dan's information as he gets into it is detailed enough that it can be used for capital improvement planning as well.
I seem to have monopolized, I'm sorry. Trustee Clayton, do you have something?
Is there any difference among these projects in terms of regulatory complexity or permitting? I mean, I'm probably using the wrong term here, but are any of these waters of the U.S. that's going to take the Corps to be involved, or, how complex are the implementations of these?
I think the Thorngate Creek improvements or Canty Creek improvements would be the most complex. They go through the whole village, go right up against, Forest Preserve property, and it connects right into the Des Plaines River. So I think those would be the most complex ones. Other ones, Portwine Road goes through and connects to other jurisdictions. Roadway-wise, we have to tie into Deerfield Road, which is currently planning some improvements at the moment. So a little more complexity to Portwine. The other ones are individual roads, mostly private roads within Riverwoods are all fairly similar. Yep.
I'm sorry, I probably took you a little off course here, so if you'd like to continue.
Oh, good. And as we can see on the project prioritization table, Bunker Court and Portwine, I'd like to highlight as the top two. Bunker Court relates into the Deerfield Road improvements. And they have stormwater outletting to the Thorngate subdivision ponds, and it's limited by the storm sewers in capacity going through Bunker Court. So to prevent any issues coming from construction along Deerfield Road. Our number one recommendation is the Bunker Court project. Port One Road coming in as a second priority in order to construct Meredith Drive or Gemini Lane improvements, as well as a multi-use path along Port One Road. If you're going to construct at some point a path, the Port One Road stormwater improvements would be required. Next slide. Here we have the first concept exhibit, just going down in priority order. This one is Bunker Court that I just described. In the top of the screen, we have Deerfield Road, and we have a storm sewer going from Deerfield Road down to the Thorngate subdivision pond. We can see in the top right, we can see that there's some overland flooding happening, flooding the road. This wasn't from a particularly intense storm, and there is likely to be much worse flooding in a 100-year storm event. The improvements for this project is just to enlarge the storm sewer from Deerfield Road down to the pond. And also it should note that for this project, we did submit for grant funding, and from Lake County SMC, on the December 7th Lake County SMC meeting, we're expecting $48,000 of grant funding to be awarded to this project. Next slide. Here we have the Port One Road improvements. We put this all on one page for ease of viewing, because Port One Road is very long. We have both Canty Creek and Thorngate Creek passing Port One Road, and storm sewer and swale improvements will be built adjacent to the road to the creeks to provide improvements for a multi-use path and connections to other perpendicular improvements to adjacent roadways. Next slide. Here we're looking at Wigan Road. You can see in the picture in the top right that, that a resident provided that there's a lot of roadway flooding that can occur at Wigan Road. And a lot of these resident photos are not from 100-year storms. So, well, we're going to see in each slide a picture of pretty intense roadway flooding. If a 100-year storm occurs, it's probably going to be more than we're seeing in the picture. And a lot of these improvements are the same solution. It's build a storm sewer adjacent to the roadway to a low point downstream. Swale improvements don't work as well on these projects because River Woods is so flat, and swales don't function as well when they're flat. So we go with a storm sewer improvement.
On these roads, when you do, if you were to remediate this, does the road need to be replaced or resurfaced, or are these all adjacent and not affecting the road?
So the main line of the storm sewer here at Wigan runs within the right-of-way of the road. We have a rare case of actually having village right-of-way in this case, which is nice. And to construct the main line here, you wouldn't need to reconstruct much road, but in order to prevent flooding on the west side of Wigan, we need to build some pipes underneath the road to connect the stormwater on the west side to the east side. And as we construct these pipes underneath the road, we'd have to open cut the road probably and reconstruct that portion.
I just bring up for further discussion at some further point. I don't think it's appropriate tonight, but I have some concern about rebuilding private roads with public money. We're back into the old public road, private road issue, which has bedeviled us for a decade. So just at some future time, we need to address that.
Thank you.
Most of the project areas are in private roadways, as you mentioned. Next slide. And here is one of those private roadways. This is Meredith Drive. Meredith Drive connects to Portland Road. In order to fix the flooding that you're seeing in the top right corner there, first Portland Road improvements would need to be built first, because building a storm sewer to take the water away from Meredith Drive would need to connect to Portland Road down to Thorngate Creek. And as we are going through private properties, you would need an easement purchased from the property owner, unless they would willingly just give the easement, which they might as you're solving their stormwater problems.
If I remember my map correctly, and I'm not sure that I do, I think Meredith runs right along the top of a very significant wetlands. Is any of this work going to in any way impact the wetlands?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, some of these, there might be isolated wetland along the way. So if we do look into designing, we'll need to delineate the wetland to see where the boundaries are. And most likely these will be temporary impacts, because if you're building the storm sewer and then you're going to restore the area. So we're not looking at, directing a lot of pavement or, just disturbing or fill the wetland. So if there's, isolated wetland in here, we're gonna, just constructing a storm sewer would consider a temporary impact as long as you store the area.
Also, Trustee Clayton, to add a little bit to that, this is kind of at the concept level, but during final design, we can fine tune kind of where water is entering the pipe and where it's not entering the pipe. So as not to drain down the wetland, so to speak, but in order to kind of solve the road problem, but not to have a littlest impact on the wetland as possible, like me said, a temporary impact.
And I don't think, recalling the maps, I don't think that there's wetland exactly where the storm sewer is. I think it is south of it, like you mentioned. So the type of impact that you can have on a wetland that isn't where your work is would be an indirect impact where you've maybe taken too much water away from it. But that can be, again, planned for in final engineering. Next slide. I think just north of Meredith is Gemini Lane. It's a very similar design. A storm sewer draining the flooded areas connects into a Portland Road storm sewer to Thorngate Creek. There would need to be easements because this is a private road. So these could be given to the village or purchased. Next slide. Here we have Clinton Lane. This is in the northern part of the village. They're also experiencing residential and roadway flooding, recurring theme throughout the study areas. A storm sewer that runs along Clinton Lane with kind of branching storm sewers that cross Clinton Lane to bring the stormwater across the road so that it no longer goes over the road. This can then be brought down into the golf course there, which will flow right on over to the Chicago River. Next slide. We're looking here is West Course Drive and Julie Lane. So there were residents who were particularly interested in stormwater solutions along West Course Drive. And one of the residents even mentioned that they hired their own engineering firm to look into solutions, but found it too expensive for them to solve all by themselves. I have to agree, it's a larger project. So there's Once again, storm sewers running along West Course Drive and going under the roadway to bring water across the road instead of, under the road instead of over it. Can go to existing outflow points going to the Chicago River. Julie Lane also experiences some flooding, which is a little bit to the north of West Course Drive. And the storm sewer can run along Julie Lane and connect down into the West Course Drive storm sewer to alleviate both roadways. Next slide. And that concludes the storm sewer related improvements. Here we have Thorngate Creek. This creek runs from east to west through the village. Regrading the creek, cleaning it out, and improving some culvert pipes that it passes through can improve the capacity and functionality of the creek, which has degraded over time. So some erosion happened, vegetation growth. Restoring the creek to previous conditions can reduce the flood height along the creek, which affects many properties. Next slide. And here we can see some modeling output. So we modeled the creek in what's called HEC-RAS. And in yellow, you can see flooding from the creek as it is right now for a 50-year storm. And then blue, if there are some culvert improvements and the creek is cleaned out and some regrading is done, we can see a reduction in where flooding occurs from the creek. Next slide. Here's Canty Creek as well, running again from east to west. The improvements to this creek are similar to Thorngate Creek. Thank you.
Is it one way of summarizing the history of the village is that we did a lot of drainage swells in a simpler time, and they worked pretty well. Pat Glenn used to always tell me they worked surprisingly well for a long time, but they've silted in some, they filled in. We have difficulty with increased rainfall amounts. We have erosion and other kinds of intrusions into some of the creeks. And over the course of time, we've added more people. We now find that the system that was thought of back in 1960 isn't necessarily the system that would work as well today. Is that perhaps one way of looking at the evolution of the village?
Exactly. It's very well said. Very similarly, we work with the East Skokie Drainage District on the Skokie River that goes through Highland Park. Same thing is happening there. So they're right in the middle of stream restoration projects. So they're kind of reclaiming the conveyance capacity of those stream systems through a series of, excavating the channel, putting in kind of embankments. Of course, that's a lot larger stream system than the two that are here, but it's a similar concept, just on a little bit larger scale.
Looking at the cost of this and the complexity of doing it, I don't know if it would be appropriate to look at this as a 40-year project, that over 40 years you would do this, or 30 years. I mean, it seems to me this isn't a 10-year capital improvement plan, at least as it sits today. Maybe the board would decide otherwise, but would it not work to posit this as something that the village commits to, but over a longer period of time?
That's exactly how the East Skokie District is doing theirs. They have a 20-year plan. And so they've, attacked the stream reaches as they can, looking for funding that, a lot of the funding sources that we're going to talk about, next couple slides, US EPA funding, SMC, FEMA, they've used it all and kind of patched their system together over the years, but made huge improvements to it too. So like in North Chicago, the whole neighborhood used to flood and doesn't anymore because of all the stream upgrades and things that they've done in those areas.
And this, Thorngate Creek and Canty Creek are more difficult projects to accomplish as the creeks run through many private properties. This will require purchasing or being given many easements. And if some property owners don't want to do that, then, that could hold up the project. So there could be other forms of cleaning up these creeks. There can be community programs, and I've heard in other villages. So instead of a lot of the costs associated with Thorngate Creek and Canty Creek projects is regarding to regrading. You can see kind of outlined in red an area of regrading along the creek up to the Forest Preserve property and almost up to Discover, and then also up along Greenbrier. And that's where a lot of the cost comes from, but other improvements can be had by doing regular maintenance, such as clearing out any downed trees, branches, and reducing vegetation growth, which could be a much cheaper solution. Next slide. Here, once again, we're looking at the flooding reduction through clearing out vegetation growth, down trees, and regrading Canty Creek. We're looking at a 50-year storm. The yellow boundary is the current flooding, and reducing down to the blue boundary if the improvements are done. Over time, with these creeks, they will fill in more with erosion and more down trees. And so the flooding condition can get worse over time. So while they are expensive, the fact that they should be done eventually to prevent worse conditions is why they end up on our priority list. Next slide. We also studied a couple drainage ditches in the southwestern portion of the village. The drainage ditches we found don't need major modifications, but do need regular maintenance. They need culverts cleaned out and the vegetation growth removed and down trees removed from the ditches. Next slide. Here we can see the cost in priority order of the recommended projects. Bunker Corp is already receiving $48,000 in funding from SMC. The most expensive projects at the bottom are Thorngate Creek and Canty Creek. The price of these projects have pushed them down our priority list.
On Port Wine Road, maybe Carissa can answer this. If you did Port Wine Road, would that reduce the cost to putting in a pathway? Or is that the two are totally separate, that it won't have any beneficial effect by doing the two projects at the same time? We're talking about putting a sidewalk or a pathway along Port Wine.
So realistically, what would drive the main stormwater improvements would be for the path. Because right now it's kind of functioning, and they can tell me differently, but it wasn't really a drive to do a whole overhaul of stormwater, but in order to put the path in and have, have a clear area to put the path, you'd have to do majority of the stormwater improvements on Port Wine to help with, because you can't just put a path down Port Wine right now. Obviously, we have the ditches with a lot of standing water. just putting a path in there, the path would just be underwater majority of the time. So what drove about the port line was the discussion of a pathway, and in order to put the pathway in, we would have to do something down Port Wine to give you an area to put the path in.
And if you did not put the pathway in, is the cost the same?
That's just for the storm water, right? So that's just to do the improvements on Port Wine for storm water only.
But the difference is if you put the stormwater pipe in, you're going to create a surface because you're going to fill it level with the road. You're not going to, right?
Right.
So you're creating the basis on which the path could then go on. The cost would be on top, but you would essentially have a surface on which to put
the path.
Right, and so we would, if moving forward, we would design the stormwater to accommodate the path. So ideally, they would just come in and have to excavate out just to put the path on it, and that's it. And no other major grading or stormwater, it would be just grading.
So do I understand then that the cost for putting a pathway in, if it's done along with the stormwater improvement, would be less? Because is that correct, or am I misinterpreting this?
There could be like an economy you're talking about a little bit.
Not a lot.
But, I mean, because you'd have people mobilized for one type of project, but maybe not the same kind of people you would mobilize for the path project. So I'm not sure about that.
Well, one of the problems with the path is you don't have level surface adjacent to the road.
Correct.
Okay, but if you do this, then you will have a level surface.
Yes.
So that part of the cost of the path goes away.
Correct.
I don't know what percentage of the cost of the path that represents. Is it a minor amount or is it a major amount? That's really my question.
It'd be substantial to fill that area in to put the pathway in. To
Okay.
do something in order to get you a level, traversable pathway.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're starting at $1.6 million and you're adding a path.
Yeah, but I think Henry's saying that the path cost would then go down.
Correct.
That's the $1.6 million plus
Would
that's
still-
already.
Here, right now, there's no place to put the path. You'd have to build it.
Yeah.
But if you put the stormwater in, you now have a place to put the path, which reduces the cost of the path, which is
Well,
one of the higher priorities that we're looking at to do. Okay.
one of the details I'm looking at is acquisition, permanent easement land acquisition.
Yep.
And if you are asking somebody to grant you an easement for stormwater management, it might be a different story if you say, and a path. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. And that's about $350,000 worth of that is an estimated land acquisition, permanent easement. In the additional technical memorandum listed in the cost, how they arrived at the cost, for the Port Wine Road estimate, it includes something called land acquisition permanent easement. And the estimated cost is $354,000.
So you're exactly right. That would be a savings to the path project. Because you would have basically an easement there to be able to put in a path where you didn't have that before. But the question to the resident would be a different question then.
It's my point earlier, it's a lot of money we're talking about in each of these. So, yeah. I'm gone, right? Shouldn't really joke about it. We're talking about the future of our village. And stormwater is a critical part of that. And preserving the village as it is and making sure that we have something
But,
concrete to handle.
I mean, what we had talked about, at least we even talked about it briefly at the committee, was that if we see our way to having some kind of stormwater impact fee, and you start to think of this as a 30-year program or a 30-year program, and you start to build up funds that you then would pair with grants and other opportunities, you just attack this as a long-range goal of the village, but you have a goal, you do something rather than say, well, we could never afford anything. You just say, we're going to do what we can as we can and keep going.
I don't think we can throw up our hands and say, well, we can't do this. I think we have to find a way to manageably put a program in place. Stormwater isn't going away. Every indication we see, rainfall going up, the ability to handle more and more water. What are areas around us doing? Are we going to catch a flow and not be able to pass it along? We can't just sit there and throw our hands up. We've got to do something, and it becomes a question of what, how, and working out a reasonable plan. And, if we can get some side benefits with a path, that's great. But I think what we really ought to be concerned about are not just homes flooding, but property values, because, stormwater, as I say, isn't going away. Climate change is here, my opinion. So on that bright note, do you have like a summary or something?
Yeah.
Mayor, may I ask one question?
Oh, absolutely. Trustee Smith.
So the question I have is, on the map, you can see kind of the questionnaire responses and the ranking of low to high impact or perceived impact by the resident. Was there any idea around like confidence level? So if you got I'm just saying on a particular street, you got 2 surveys back, it's probably not a huge issue. If you got 20 surveys back for 40 homes or 10 homes, or, can you talk a little bit about how you determined the 10 areas? And maybe it's in the reports and I missed it. And if it was, I apologize.
So I agree completely. When we saw clusters, these got our attention because we want to solve issues, because looking at the cost of these improvements, ideally we're solving a problem that impacts multiple homeowners or also impacts roadways. So when we saw these clusters of reported problems, and they could be reporting similar problems of roadway flooding and property flooding, if we saw a cluster of swale maintenance, it wasn't as alarming, but we did focus on those clusters, and those are what led us to this list of study areas.
And so getting back to the idea, I'm sorry, thank you for answering the question. My question was also around then confidence level. So if you got 2 out of 10 homes responded back, you said, all right, and I'm making up numbers, obviously, but if you got 50% of the homes back, is that not only the clusters where there's clumps of homes together, but like a percentage of homes, or was it really just clusters? And that's okay, either. I'm just trying to understand.
I think from my experience, it was the clusters, but also on the ground experience with some of the rainfall events that we have responded to in the village. So I know Pat had quite a file on locations that flooded, and Chris has given us a lot of feedback that these have been visually inspected as well during storm events. So I think that there was a measure of, kind of corroboration that we did through that process.
Thank you.
If I can add to it. So when we first started, before we got all the resident surveys back, we had Caesar tested him to go through all our archive files. So Caesar can tell us how many files you've gone through, thousands. So yeah, so all this, all these studied area, focus areas were decided by resident surveys, our, historical project files, resident complaints. It's a combination of everything.
Go to the next slide.
Before we move on, I'd just like to note for each of these costs, these costs are built on concept improvement plans. And concept plans have built in kind of a safety factor for the cost, because some things might come up, but maybe they won't. And also each of these costs have built into it the cost of purchasing permitted easements. The residents may just give the easements because they want their stormwater problem solved. Like, they want it to happen. So, this is kind of the cost if you have to purchase all the easements. And the easements can be a large part of the cost.
These are the costs if we decided to do it today. If this is a 20 or 30-year project, these costs don't apply, correct?
Sure, there'd be inflation, certainly.
Yeah, yeah.
And what would you anticipate a percentage of the costs that could be obtained not from Riverwoods or the homeowner?
The main source would then be grants. And Mike will dive deeper into grants, I think, on the next slide. So, next slide.
All right. Perfect timing. Where are we going to get money from? So you mentioned some internal funding options, and those are listed there at the top. So there's more than just a utility fee, but of course, there's budgeting, bonds, and special service area that technically. Externally, to answer your question, there is Stormwater Management Commission has been successful in getting a grant stream of money from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity at the state. So last year they got $30 million to spend countywide, and they're hoping to get another 30 this year and another 30 next year. So they're working hard on that. The state representatives and state senators are working hard on making that happen. There is also the Stormwater Infrastructure Repair Fund. It's a little smaller pot of money, but as Dan mentioned before, that's going to the commission December 7th for award at $48,000. So when I talked about the Skokie Drainage District a little while ago, under the IEPA list, there's section 319. So that is the main source of money that the East Skokie Drainage District used to do most of its stream restoration work. So typically that is a 60-40 grant. So the EPA gives you 60%, and then you have to have 40% local match. And that can be from a variety of sources. It can be from Stormwater Management Commission. It can be from village funds, another grant source as well. But that they would get, excuse me, I think about annually, they almost got at least $1 million. I know some of the projects got more than $1 million on the Skokie River. There's a couple more on there from IEPA. We haven't listed every source of grant funding on here, just kind of to be brief. But for example, FEMA also has stream restoration money. They came out with 2 new grant sources over the last 2 days. So our company has individuals that are tied into all these sources, but I mentioned the disaster declaration that Cook County got in September. Biden's office just issued a notice of funding opportunity for that yesterday. So the thing that I'm interested in that announcement is it has a mention of anywhere in the state can apply for certain funding, and they don't explain it very well, but typically disaster funding goes directly to the communities that were hit. So typically Cook County in those situations, but this one did have a little promising wording in it that we're going to investigate. Then FEMA has their normal yearly programs, which are shown up there, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, pre-disaster, and the FMA assistance. They also have a new-ish grant source called BRIC. It's called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, something like that. But they're throwing a lot of money into that. So there's federal funding sources that are popping up literally on a daily basis that we have been successful working with other agencies on and obtaining those funds.
What would Riverwoods need to do upfront to apply for these grants. And in the past, we've had to lay out a significant amount of money to do a phase 1 study before you could go ahead and get the grant. So it was a sort of a bet on whether or not we would be successful. Is this similar?
So the village has done some legwork in order to be eligible for FEMA grants. So you've adopted the Lake County All Natural Hazards Plan. So the communities that adopt that plan are then eligible for all the FEMA grants. For IEPA, this is where the fact that you're in both the North Branch and the Des Plaines watershed is an advantage for IEPA because they look at those as 2 different watersheds and 2 different funding pots. So theoretically, you could apply for 2 grants at once, but there is a local match. So I think the other answer is to kind of, as Bruce mentioned, is to kind of plan out, this is, okay, we're going to do a 20-year program. What can we bite off each year? How much local match would we have available to kind of support some of these grant applications?
Well, I would sort of take an adverse position on that. I would say that the project we would do first were the ones that we would get the most funding for. I don't know how that would work, but it seems that if you want to accomplish it all over a period of time, I'd grab whatever we could get initially and do the projects that we would get the most external funding, and that would be the project that we would focus on. Certainly that's just my opinion on how to approach it.
Certainly, that's one way to look at it. The most impactful financially or the most impactful in terms of the entire program?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what East Skokie did. So they did have a 20-year plan, but when the grant source announced their notice of funding opportunity, they looked at their different projects and said, okay, this is the one that's going to match that grant. So exactly is what you're suggesting.
I'm excluding Bunker Court because we have to do that. Correct. I don't think that's not a question anymore, is it?
No, I don't think so.
And if you remember what drove the board approval for the study is really the big crux for a lot of these applications, especially the DCEO. We met with Kurt Warner, Wilford, sorry. Mike was the head engineer. Kurt Wilford is now where Mike was. And he basically stated showing that you have a study and showing that you have these certain projects in the line of buckets, that helps drive that you get more scoring, more eligibility, because you show that there is a need for it. It's not just, oh, we're applying for this grant because this grant's out there. So just to kind of recap way back 8 months ago when we talked about this is kind of what's circling back to it.
You asked, what do we need to do to apply for some of these grants? And as we just did apply for the Bunker Court grant, what was needed was the concept exhibit that you saw previously in this presentation and a cost estimate that's included in the memo you should have received, I think, on Friday. So with a permit form, a cover letter, the concept exhibit, and a cost estimate, we got the grant. So these other concept exhibits here for these other study areas could be used to apply for grants. Next slide.
Any other? Yeah.
I guess that's it. Any other questions?
Just the now what?
What were your plans on next steps? I think the first question is whether or not whether it should be done, whether it's over 20 years, 30 years, or 40 years.
Yeah.
And if so, how to approach it.
Right.
And I think if someone wanted to give us $15 million, probably the board would say, fine, we're starting next year. But there's no way to approach this unless you approach some financial responsibility for it. And if we can get, if we agree that this needs to be done, and if we can, without spending a significant amount of money to get the material we need to get the grant, I don't see any harm in trying to do that for all of the projects. And whatever comes through, on the grant we did for, not the playground, but around Village Hall, we had to commit to that beforehand. I mean, that was not a, once we applied, we had to commit to it. We didn't have a choice at the end to say, well, we've changed our minds. We don't want to do this and put money towards it.
We could actually change our minds, but then lose a little scoring going forward the next time. I'm assuming that this is going to be, they have similar regulations for this, so we would have to make that conscious decision that if we had a significant grant, that we were going to go forward with it.
Well, we have a budgeting exercise coming up. I think that'll help us. I don't see the board saying we're not going to do this. I think that we need to be very serious about the future here and lay out a program. Maybe it's not a 10-year program, maybe it's longer, but I think the budgeting exercise is going to help us decide.
I always hate to be on the opposite side. I go back to the idea that there are no homes flooded, and that although I recognize access and roads being flooded during a 12 or 18-hour period where an ambulance might not get by to those specific affected houses, that's a fairly small chance. I'm not saying it's insignificant and it's not important, but you're talking a lot of money to prevent that issue. And I still am concerned about the idea that homes are not flooded, just properties.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see some reasons to get beyond that.
Well, we do have a stormwater management committee. The chair isn't with us tonight, but we do have a stormwater management committee. And I think that that's certainly reason to call a committee meeting. The committee can roll through some of these issues and then bring, maybe bring a stronger recommendation to the board about, direction, maybe prioritization. I think the budgeting exercise will fold neatly into that. So that would be my now what, answer to the now what question, rather. Any agreement, disagreement? He's not here, so it's very easy to do this. Trustee Jamerson, if you're listening. So if the board is of mind, I think we really ought to have the committee take a more detailed look and bring it back. And not put it off, but really get on it. Are you agreeable? Just kind of head nods, head bobs. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your work, appreciate the effort on this. And you'll be working with a committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Chairman Granitor.
Thank you. I have to admit that when I moved into my house 26 years ago, every time it rained, I flooded. And I put in a very significant flood control system in my house. And now it doesn't flood anymore. Hoffman Lane used to go underwater every time we had a rain. And since they improved the swale on Deerfield Road, we don't go underwater. It hasn't happened. My driveway used to be underwater, literally. And I'm wondering if the improvements that are proposed for Deerfield Road with regard to water management are going to change some of the things that we're looking at now on parameters with this program.
They promised that it would be no worse, and they're putting in an updated.
That's what I mean. Maybe it'll be better.
Well,
and maybe some of the stuff we're looking at now, because I know that when I first moved in, literally, you got a gollywomper rain that lasted 2 hours, and I couldn't find my driveway because it was underwater. And it was the drainage coming down Hoffman that hit Deerfield Road and couldn't go anywhere because the swale was inadequate. They made the swales deeper over there, and now Hoffman doesn't flood. So I'm wondering if, when they say they're going to improve the drainage along Deerfield Road, if that's going to change some of the stuff that we're looking at here.
They didn't promise. They used they increased they increased the ability to retain water, store water from when they first proposed the Deerfield project. They improved it.
Right.
I think they got some new 20 or 2050 or
But
something.
does that affect,
But-
for example, Wiggum?
But all that they would say is it is not going to be any worse. They're not going to make it worse. They did not say that it would get better.
Funny, I heard them say better, but then again, that was a long time ago.
Well, I think this is a good topic for the committee, the Deerfield Road project, and bring that all together as well. So thank you. Next item of business would be the ecologist report, and I will tell you that he will be prepared for an annual wrap-up. So not this meeting, obviously. Next is the Plan Commission report. Chairman Breykoff, please.
I can be very brief. I have no report.
Yay, you want to pass the microphone?
I will.
The Zoning Board of Appeals, please, Chairman
And I
Editor.
could be equally brief and say exactly the same thing.
Thank you. Police report. Chief, you're with us tonight. Thank you.
Yes, the police activity is in the board packet. A couple other items I wanted to mention. An assessor from the Illinois Law Enforcement Accreditation Program, ILEAP, was in Riverwoods on November 13th and 14th. So I told you that he was coming to conduct our on-site assessment of the Riverwoods Police Department for accreditation. He actually began his review several weeks ago when we sent him accreditation files along with our policies and procedures. This is our second time going through the 4-year process. We received our initial accreditation in 2020. During the exit interview with the assessor, he told me that the department met all 264 ILEAP standards and substandards, and that he would make a recommendation to the ILEAP board that we be accredited. So we expect that we'll probably get an award sometime early next year. I also wanted to mention that of over the 800 law enforcement agencies in Illinois, only 60 are accredited by ILEAP, and another 37 are accredited by the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, which is a international program. Many departments used to do CLIA, the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, but when Illinois started its own accreditation process for Illinois-specific agencies, a lot of them stopped doing CLIA and started doing the ILEAP one. Separately from ILEAP accreditation, we also received our use of force certification through the Illinois Chiefs. They certified the Riverwoods Police Department that meets the federal use of force eligibility requirements set forth by the U.S. Department of Justice for discretionary federal grants. The U.S. Department of Justice discretionary grant funding is only available to state, local, and university or college law enforcement agencies that have obtained or are in the process of seeking credentials certifying they meet certain standards on the use of force. So we did this 3 years ago, and we'll do it again in 3 years. And that's all I have.
That's a lot. And I will tell you that I did get interviewed, and what the interviewer told me about our chief and our police force was incredible. He was really very impressed with all of the people that he talked to, the policies that he reviewed, and he thought there was a great camaraderie among our force, and led very well by our chief. So I wanted to add that to this. And when that accreditation does come in, that award, it's a big deal, and we will have a presentation at the village board because it's well deserved.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for our chief? Okay, hearing none. Our fire chief is not here with us this evening. I really don't have anything to add tonight. So new business, first order of business would be the approval of the mayor's appointment to fill a vacancy on the Plan Commission. And I have brought to you Catherine Romanelli, and everybody I think knows Catherine. But Catherine has had a work career centered on sales and management. She was a director for a division of the Chicago Tribune, as a managing broker for 7 real estate offices that specialized in apartment rentals. She worked for 12 years in general property management, and also as a member of, or as a resident of Thorngate from 2012, so over 10 years. She was a member of the HOA board since 2014 and served as president for 3 years. She's currently the vice chair of the Architectural Review Committee and on the Finance and Welcome Committees. She served on the nominating committee. She finished 6 years on the advisory council. She was a member of the Significant Impact Group for Deerfield Road. So professionally and as a resident with her volunteerism, I believe Catherine is a terrific candidate for appointment. Do I hear a motion, please?
Second.
There is a second.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Catherine, congratulations. I have to add, she knows a lot about the board involvement too, so, and we all know that. Thank you to you and Russ for attending so very often. Thank you. Moving along, next item of business, I think we're going to delay that. That is the approval for a reconfiguration of our Village Hall offices. The next item of business is a contract for fencing entrance work for the Village Hall play area. I'd like our Director Witt, sorry, I'm looking over there. I don't care who, no, I do. Director Witt, would you please lead us through this? Thank you.
I just need to find my place in our budget here, in our packet, I'm sorry. So what we were looking for, Mayor, is some separation between the playground area and Port Wine Road. Some of the concern would be that if there are children utilizing the playground, that either they lose their bearings or they just get excited and they start running toward the road. Looking for a separation means just to give them a visual barrier for stopping as they meander eastward. So what we looked at is getting quotes on different types of fencing. I know that GHA had worked with Real to get numbers for several types of fence. One which was a chain link, I believe. One was an aluminum fence. And the one that we're recommending is a cedar split rail fence that would be located within the tree zone to the west of Port Wine Road, be about a 175-foot length of fencing. Both the village forester felt and the engineers and myself feel that the fence could be installed with minimal disruption to any of the critical root zones for the trees. Particularly if we do this in this upcoming cooler weather. And the quotation came in at $8,400, which would be a change order to the contract for the playground area. And we're recommending that we move forward with that for the safety and protection of the children that would be out on the playground.
Are there any questions? Oh, let's have a motion first. May I have a motion for approval of the contract?
Can I ask one question, please, Mayor?
You can after we do the motion,
Okay.
and then we'll discuss it.
I'll
Okay.
move
Okay.
to
Second.
$8,400 to install the cedar fence as located on the drawing.
Thank you. Trustee Smith, please.
The only question is, I'm just concerned about wildlife. I think a split rail should not impede wildlife. It impede children from the road, but not. So a split rail, can you describe what a split rail is for me? Let me ask the question more simply.
The split rail fence, the typical split rail fence is a post which would be set approximately 10 feet apart, typically about 3 feet high, and has generally 2 rails of split cedar sections, one at the top and one at the midpoint. So again, what it would do is it acts as a visual barrier. So certainly kids could climb through it, I get that, but it would act as a visual barrier for them that, this is a stopping point in that playground area. We felt that the split rail would be the most appropriate thing to install from a visual aesthetic perspective, because the natural wood effect would blend right in with the, not only with the vegetation, but the trees in the area too. So it'll be something that is not going to, impede movement of small animals in and out of the area. And it also is not going to be something that's going to catch any kind of refuse that might be blowing through the area, as you would see like with a chain link fence or some of the aluminum fencing where you have tight pickets.
Does that area of Port Wine Road have a ditch?
I'll let the engineer describe that better
Because I'm
for
wondering,
you.
does the ditch serve the same purpose? That's really where my question's going.
The only thing is with a ditch, a kid could still run and just go right onto the road. At least the fence slows them down. And also the fence is going to be pushed back relatively farther away from the roadway. So you're talking about, I'm thinking like deer. I'm thinking that's where we're kind of.
That's
so
where I was
deer
going,
are still
yeah.
going to clear it. They can clear 3 feet. They clear. These are similar to what you see at the forest preserves. They only use split rail fence at the forest reserves majority of the time. But pushing that further back, the deer are going to jump and then they're going to walk. So it's not like they're jumping the fence and they're landing in the middle of the road. Obviously, that's a concern as well.
Yep.
But there is a smaller ditch, but that's not going to stop some kids from running just straight. At least the fence would, I have to stop and they have to do some sort of physical obstacle in order to continue going forward.
Thank you. The intent is not to have the fence inside the drainage area, because otherwise you have a concern that it's going to block the flow if small branches or whatever get caught up on the posts.
Trustee Clayton, please.
It's still in terms of how fast a toddler can move, it's still a fairly long distance between where we have seating for adults right at the moment, which is primarily under the shelter, and the other side of the playground, because it's kind of elongated in that direction. How much does a bench cost? If you could put a bench in front of the fence so that you could actually have supervision right in front of the fence?
We have not priced out a bench. That was not in our concept. My guess would be you could probably buy a bench for under $2,000 a piece, maybe $1,500 at the most. I know the new bike rack that we're looking at to install at the corner of the pavilion area is a metal rack, which is, I think, 5 feet long, and it's done out of metal, and it's a pre-finished piece. And that unit is looking to be about $1,600 to $1,700 in itself. So I think that you're looking at some costs well below that.
Okay. One of the things that I would just ask, if you would consider at some point in the not too distant future approving the addition of a bench.
Sure.
Okay.
We've got 2 now. We've got 1 there and we've got 1 out and back. And to add a third, yeah.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Trustee Eastman. Trustee Hollander.
Aye.
Trustee Smith.
Aye.
Trustee Clayton.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item of business is approval of a resolution adopting an updated emergency operations plan for the Village of Riverwoods. Chief, would you like to walk us through that?
Sure. So the original plan was approved some years ago. When I wrote the original plan, I want to say it was 2013 or 14. It really hasn't gone through that many changes since. Every once in a while, the county reviews it, the Lake County Emergency Lake County EMA Emergency Management Agency. They review the plan every 2 years. And sometimes due to some changes with federal or state guidelines, they ask us to put some more words in. Most of it is just formal, and they really, we haven't changed the way that we operate or how we would respond to an emergency. I'm actually updating the plan throughout the year, usually with contact information. So as far as how we respond, nothing's really changed. Everything's still in there. They just had me change a few words here and there and some lines here and there and add some wording, but it really doesn't change how we operate. And they did review it and they did approve it. And we haven't had a resolution adopting the plan in a while. So we thought we'd bring the plan back again this year for a resolution ordinance adopting and updating the plan.
Do I have a motion for adoption of the resolution?
Title should just be a resolution. I don't know why it says a resolution ordinance. It's a draftsman error.
Oh, it's an ordinance.
It's just a resolution.
Just a resolution. Revolution.
I'll move we pass the ordinance.
No, don't say that. Could I have a second to whatever motion that was, please?
Sure, second.
Is there any further discussion? Well, then let's vote on the resolution. Roll call,
Trustee
please.
Hollander?
Aye.
Trustee Smith?
Aye.
Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Eastman?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Last item of business, approval of an ordinance regarding the Illinois Paid Leave Act for all workers, Illinois Paid Leave for All Workers Act. Attorney Hubert, will you help us?
I'll try. The state of Illinois passed a new law that takes effect January 1, 2024, that requires that all employers provide a minimum of 40 hours of paid leave for both part-time and full-time workers, although for part-time workers, the amount of paid leave can be prorated based on the estimated number of hours they work. We started looking at the personnel manual to see what kind of changes we would need to make. At the same time, the Illinois Municipal League had been gathering some data, and they've, on their site, have put together a number of memos and comments from council they've contacted who've come to the conclusion that home rule communities were not included in this act, or they weren't preempted, let me put it that way. When the state passes laws, if they don't explicitly preempt home rule communities, to the extent that they're dealing with matters that pertain to their governance and affairs, not statewide concerns, are allowed to make their own rules, their own laws. The amount of leave that you give to workers, most attorneys who look at this now believe is something that pertains to the governance and affairs of the community, how we induce our employees to work, how we schedule leave. I think one of the concerns about the act was that the employees are supposed to be given the option of taking the paid leave for any reason or for no reason. And there's some, I'd call it loosey-goosey language about trying to reasonably provide some kind of system for when they give you notice or how much notice they have to give you before they can take the leave. We started trying to apply this to the part-time, some of the part-time employees we have in the village who don't actually schedule leave because they only sign up, for example, in the police department to work when they intend to work. So they don't actually sign up for work with the idea that they would later take leave. They sign up for work to be available for work. So we started to try and figure out how we would adjust the act to deal with all of these circumstances. And at the end of the day, I was persuaded after reading through a number of the materials that as a home rule community, the simplest solution for us, at least momentarily, is to simply opt out. It gives us the most options going forward. We can always amend, and maybe we should bring amendments back to our personnel manual to include paid leave. Maybe we can do it as a home rule community in a way that meets our needs a little bit better. If the state later changes the law and makes it explicitly applicable to home rule communities, then we'd be subject to it anyway. But the consensus seems to be among a number of home rule communities. At this point, I know Hoffman Estates, Schaumburg, Palatine, among others, have already adopted an opt-out ordinance. So I'm recommending that we do this to give us the most flexibility going forward. Not that we don't want to provide paid leave. We already do provide paid leave to our employees, but that we have the most flexibility in how we shape it going forward.
You're saying we already meet these requirements?
Not with respect
except for the police part-time?
Not with respect to our other part-time employees, and not with respect to the reason or the manner in which they can take the leave. Also, when you provide the paid leave under the Act, you have to either bank it all in advance at the beginning of the year, in which case it's not carried over, or you can accrue it during the year, in which it carries over if it's unused. So our carryover requirements are different. So again, and if you want the paid leave to be part of your vacation leave, well then it's something you have to pay out under there's a different act that controls when you have to pay out unused vacation. So it ends up being implicated in our vacation leave policy, our sick leave policy, our carryover policy for both of those. And we are still looking at it. I have been looking at how many amendments and what we would have to do to try and be fully compliant with the Act. At the moment, we comply with it with respect to our full-time employees for the most part.
Have we had any concerns or complaints from the employees over the last few years on leave or their ability to take time off?
Not that I'm aware of. The Comp and Benefits Committee met on this and got into a rather detailed discussion, as you've heard. And this was the best resolution that the committee put forward, really, to take care of our employees and give us the most flexibility going forward.
Okay.
Do I have a motion for approval of the
First reading.
Oh, first reading? Do I have a motion for
waive or first reading?
waive the first reading? Do I have a motion to waive first reading, please?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I have a motion for second reading and approval.
So move.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Trustee Smith?
Aye.
Trustee Clayton?
Aye.
Trustee Eastman?
Aye.
Trustee Hollander?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. No reason to go into executive session. The next date and time for our meeting is the Finance Workshop, December 5th at 6 o'clock. We'll have food. And this is a very important meeting, so I would hope that we would all be present. And then following that will be our December 5 board meeting starting at 7:30. So do I have a motion for adjournment, please? Second? Anybody, please?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Not even listening to the other side.